Hey, this is Eric. We're still waiting for a couple folks to come in, but welcome.
Hi. Okay, no problem. So are we the only two ones? Hey, Eric, I'm checking my audio. Can you hear me?
I hear something.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay.
I think I might have had my audio down or something. So,
No problem. Yeah, I just want to make sure that my audio was working.
oh, glad to have you here. Let's see. Oh, I see a familiar face. That's fantastic.
All right.
We might have to wait a minute or two. Hey, I threw a question, Cecilia, in the in the agenda. Wait a second. Cecilia, are you also Sheena, or are there two extra people?
For other people, I don't know. Sheena, how are you?
It all seems like it's working better now. Oh,
we can
Sheena,
definitely
yeah,
read the chat then. Thank you, Sheena.
Thank you.
All right. You threw a question in the agenda, you said?
Yes, let me pull that up. We should be joined by a few more folks in a second, but that means that the folks who are on the call have an opportunity to kind of think through this a second. Just a second, let me pull that up. All right, and well, here's my proposed question. And it's sort of like, because we wanted to talk a little bit about resources today, and I was wondering sort of what have folks used in order to form their work around inclusive ecosystem building? Does that sound reasonable?
Is that our popcorn question, or do you have a
that's what I was thinking about as a popcorn question. It's just like a short answer on that, and we can get into it a little bit more deeply.
Okay, can you throw the agenda in the chat for those playing at home?
As soon as I can get the correct window to show up here.
Used to help inform your work. So many things.
Ha.
Yeah, exactly, Jose. Right.
Oh. Do you already had it? That's great.
She's on it. Okay. So,
And I'll get the link in there in a second.
all right. So do you want to call on somebody? What do you want to do?
Mom,
Oh, I hear a small ecosystem builder somewhere. Hi, Antonia. How are you? All right. Eric's question was, what have you used? What resources have you used to inform your work around inclusive ecosystem building? That's a big, wide question.
Yes.
And I think Eric should lead us and start by telling us what he's used, right, Dia?
Excellent. Yeah, so I'll try and model good behavior, and I'll try and make it brief, although I won't keep it down to like 5 words. So I am listening to the distributed podcast from the folks behind WordPress, because their company is entirely distributed. So that means that there's no office, there's no one central office, although they do come together on a somewhat frequent basis. The podcast I was listening to today was talking with someone who is neurodivergent, and just talking about the different challenges or the challenges and opportunities around having different folks in that distributed environment. And it's just really helpful to hear that from another point of view, because I think it applies, you know, no single kind of person is monolithic or represents, you know, all of any kind of group. There's lots of different, you know, spectrums and ranges. So it was really useful to hear from someone about some of the different challenges, but also how organizations can overcome them and work better with their various employees. So I thought that was useful. I will go to Jose.
All right, can you hear me? Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
yes, we can hear you.
So what have we used to help inform work around inclusive ecosystem building? So so the organizations I work for, we have we work in 2 states. We work in Florida, we've been there for almost 30 years. And so I am in charge of our newly open operations, which happened 3 years ago in North Carolina. And so one of the challenges that have been tasked is to precisely that, to inform not only ecosystem partners, but also sponsors and elected officials to tell them about the importance of that issue, and also informing them about, you know, this is why you should put resources into minority business programs, you know, whether it's African American or Latino. So one thing that we've been really working at in the past year or so is actually coming to state elected officials and tell them, the state, because they don't spend any money on at least Latino entrepreneurs programs. So we've been telling them this is the importance of why you should know. This is the importance of why you should keep in mind about supporting programs like ours, so that the state gets into the inclusive ecosystem building and inclusive ecosystem investing, if you will. So that actually has worked very well, believe it or not, in a heavily Republican not to get into politics, but it's just reality of it. The North Carolina legislature, we've seen some progress. And so that is actually interesting, and we're seeing that, yes, the legislature wants to be inclusive into where it puts resources when it comes to entrepreneurial resources throughout the state of North Carolina. So that is something that we're focusing on right now.
You can popcorn to somebody.
Oh yeah, I'll go I'll send it to Dia.
Cool, thank you. I see a few new people, so I'll just introduce myself real quick. My name is Dia Ghosh, and I'm based in Ada, Oklahoma. I work in economic development with a focus on entrepreneurship. So that was a pretty dive deep popcorn question, but I kind of like it. Other than kind of following all the awesome links that Celia shares on all her networks, I really try to be very intentional, even if it's a small thing, like if I'm in charge of finding speakers for a conference in our community, just kind of bringing that forward, that if you are just a little more intentional, it is possible to be more inclusive. So not particularly any specific resource, but I think whenever we have that speakers bureau up and diverse speakers bureau up and running, that would definitely be something very helpful. I will pass on to Antonia.
Hey, hello everyone. Antonia here. I will also just briefly introduce myself because I think there's a few people I haven't connected with on the call. So I'm Antonia, and I am a diversity and inclusion specialist at Change Catalyst. And we also host the Tech Inclusion conferences. So just to make sure I understood the question correctly, this was about the resources we've used to support our efforts on inclusive ecosystem building, correct, Eric?
Yes, yes, that's where I was heading with it. Yes, thanks.
Okay, great, awesome. Well, I think my response is pretty brief. With just lately, I've been trying to go to a lot more events and go to a broader variety of events, not just in terms of subject matter, but also the groups that are hosting them. Whether they are specific like cultural organizations or specific like interest groups. I found that just going out and networking and connecting with people from all different sides of the ecosystem and getting to know them and learning what issues are points of contention near and dear to their heart, what they're most excited about, what is up and coming, has helped me to better map where Change Catalyst can potentially build more inclusive ecosystems going forward and how we can better serve the community. I will popcorn to Sheena. Sheena, have you gone yet? Right, we have a.
Wait a second.
She hasn't, and I know that she said it's difficult to talk, so I don't know if you want to type in your response in the meantime, if you'd rather do that, and then we can popcorn over to Liva and go from there. Does that sound like a good plan? Okay.
I did a question to start out with, but here in Denmark, I'm from Female Founders of the Future, and we are working with the question, if we unintentionally can design for inequality, how do we intentionally design for equality? And in that case, also really looking into the intentional actions needed, also to create that inclusion for the equality that kind of goes hand in hand, and diversity. So that with that in mind, we are working on a report, Return on Diversity in Entrepreneurship, with a guide on what to do as a startup, what to do as an investor. And we are also making a commitment within I'll type out the quote in a second. We're also making a commitment within the investment environment, and what is following as the next is the accelerator programs. So really looking into where is it that we unintentionally were designing for inequality, and where can we intentionally design for equality, and that way design for diversity and inclusion. And then we are, that is what we are doing. Everything about our perspective is mainly gender as kind of the minimal viable product of diversity. But what we hear is that a lot of the actors wanted to join in on this, want to have more parameters, more indicators of diversity. So I'm like, hey, if you want to measure more, go ahead, let's do that, which is we are really happy about. And then we designed 7 principles for entering a conversation into the gender conversation, as that is our perspective mainly. But 7 conversation guidelines to even having a conversation on a topic, to not be distracted from the gains and possibilities of entrepreneurship in doing all these layers. Yeah. And I don't know who did not go yet, but please popcorn it over to someone else.
I'd be very curious to see your 7, your list of 7. That would be fabulous. And so
I will add it to the list.
Okay, great. And then Sheena mentioned national programs like Rise of the Rest that are supportive, which I think is fabulous. And Rise of the Rest is coming to my neighborhood, and Diaz. So we're very happy that in the middle of the country, we get to see the Rise of the Rest and be part of that. And then surveying people. So I think those conversations are really important. I'm facilitating a panel at NBIA, and one of the topics that we talked about was how do you engage in a community without being engaged in the community? That's just not possible, right? So in equity and inclusion, there's nothing about us without us is a phrase that we hear a lot. So I guess I will fill in. That's part of the things that I do. As Dia knows from being on my social media, I tend to repost a lot of things, but it's very hard to cull. So I created a Google capture. So once a week, I get, if it has inclusion, diversity, and belonging. Those are things that I flag because my focus around diversity and equity and inclusion is creating a sense of belonging. So I added that to my word search so that those things get flagged and I get just, here's an article or here's something about that, and that includes those words. So I found Google search words and sending myself a newsletter helps because there's so much out there. Reading a lot, reading books like Invisible Women, which is a fabulous book, especially if you're in data. And then listening to podcasts like Seeing White or The Will to Change or all those things. But since there's so much, I'm going to +1 on Antonia and say conversations with people. Because at the end of the day, it's about people. And so if you don't have engagement and it's all high level ideas, then it doesn't have any effect, right? So I think that's important. So share the question that you just put in there, Luba.
I just shared it. Whoa.
Great. And then Eric, how would you like to facilitate this?
Sure. Well, let's see. So I'm looking at Liva's question. If we oh yeah. So just to restate, yeah, if we unintentionally can design for inequality, and she said this, but if we unintentionally can design for inequality, how do we intentionally design for equality? So that's a good thing I'll put that in our show notes, which I'm typing away on as we speak. So one of the things that kind of led us down this road, we've had, I'll say, sort of a little bit of occasional progress, but a little bit of fits and starts around this idea of a speakers bureau or a speaker list around this topic. So there's a number of folks have expressed an interest, but it's been difficult kind of getting that thing going. So I want to just share a link that Dia had shared with some of the organizers on this a little bit earlier. And it's kind of a reading list around inclusive, more inclusive economic development that Del Gines from Kansas City Fed had actually put together. So as we started looking at this, and it's got a great list of articles to look at, I thought it might be useful to think of this topic of resources a little more broadly. To just confirm, we're all, I think we're all sort of ecosystem builders in our own ways. What would be the most useful kind of resources that we could arrive at maybe more quickly that could help us move forward so that we can maybe move in the direction of whether that's the Speakers Bureau or something else. Does that make any sense?
So I wanted to ask all of you, when we talk about Inclusive Speaker Bureau, are we talking about a speaker bureau that speaks about inclusion, or are we talking about an inclusive speaker bureau of ecosystem builders that show diverse perspectives on a myriad of subjects, but we want to make sure that there's diversity in the speakers? Because those are two nuanced things. And I think that making the goal clear is important, or making sure that both those goals are met. So
that's an excellent question. So yeah, I'd love to get everybody's read on that. For me, I'll just say it's more choice number 2, having a diverse set of speakers that can speak on topics in and around economic development and entrepreneurial ecosystems. That's where in my head we've wanted to go. But so I'm voting for choice 2. I put my dot on that. Who else wants to vote?
And I'll second Eric on that. I missed the last call where we had a more robust discussion around this, but I feel like a common excuse often used by several, events or communities is that it just takes too much work and too much time, or which is not an excuse at all, but really having this resource in hand kind of helps eliminate that. So I would also vote for option 2.
I agree.
Yeah, me too.
Oh, well, this is easy. Not necessarily. I mean, let's see, who else do we want to have chime in?
Sheeta chimed in, saying about diverse
yes.
faces and perspectives. Liva?
I was extremely busy typing. I was kind of listening while typing to provide you with the 7 guiding principles we used for facilitating debates and discussions. We had 2 anthropologists to observe the room, what happened when using this. And then we were using, we really go for the 50-50 on gender. We go for the 50-50 on different perspectives, have different roles playing out in everything we do. We have in April coming up 3 days masterclass in New York, where we have startups coming to New York, and to curate that program. To start out with, they were like, the title is Female Founders in Tech, and everyone they started with doing that with the Trade Council of New York, the Danish Trade Council of New York. And they were like, then we can have all these amazing female speakers. And I was like, no, you can have amazing people coming to speak, and let those awesome people, those with the insight and knowledge, let that be men and women, let that be white, black, green, I don't care what color, let that be different perspectives. Because to grow as an entrepreneur, you need those different perspectives, you need knowledge from whoever got the knowledge. So that was, these are our principles in doing anything. And anytime we make events here in Copenhagen on entrepreneurship and gender, it is even though the titles are most often something about women and female, there's always men and women on stage. And
can I ask you about the how is the gender fluidity addressed in your convenings then? People who aren't who don't identify as male or female, so
yeah.
non-binary.
Yeah, we are very much aware that when we talk about this topic, we have our identification number, and either you have an equal or an unequal number as your identification number, and that expresses whether you have a penis or a vagina when you were born. So the data we have only shows whether you have an equal or unequal number at the end of your number, your identification number. But we're very much aware that that has nothing to do with what you identify yourself with or what sexual orientation you have in any kind of phase. And we often address that when we talk about gender today, it is the very binary understanding of it, which does not include the very broader conversation where we would actually not want to talk about gender. But this is only to address the statistics of access to knowledge, funding, etc.
Yeah, I think that, you know, all the forms that we have to fill out, all the ways that, you know, the census is coming up in the United States, and all of that just addresses that segment. And you have to mark in your male, female, gender. You don't get to, there is no other option, right?
In Denmark, there is.
Oh, well,
there is male, female, I don't identify, or I don't want to inform you.
Okay, that's a huge leap, right?
Yeah.
And
so there's often 4 options: male, female, I don't identify with any of the above, or I don't want to inform you.
I think that's a powerful beginning to try to be able to address that. I think, Antonia, correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of the around Change Catalyst, your work also expands past cisgender kind of identification. Am I correct in saying that?
Could you maybe elaborate a little bit further on what you mean by that?
So your cisgender would be whether you're born with, you know, whatever reproductive parts you're born with, and then of course there's other things and that aren't. But I'm trying to remember if in Change Catalyst, in your convenings and whatnot, you talk about or you approach the different groups that are represented without putting them into it's an either or kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, as far as like content and like subject matter at Tech Inclusion, yes, we have discussed that. Like some speakers have discussed that. They've discussed their own experience, or also like solutions that they've implemented in their own organizations with regards to gender inclusivity. We also have worked directly with companies to help them create more inclusive environments with regards to that, and many other topics. But one of the things that we consistently see is not only like that we do on our event forms, but that we sometimes see on other event forms. Any kind of registration form are much more binary options being offered for things as simple as like a speaking application and things like that. So we have had opportunities to actually work with companies who are designing their own events, and that is often one of the major things that crops up right away. So so to address not only that, but also some other recurring issues that we see around like designing inclusive physical spaces. We did create a toolkit, which I can certainly link here in the chat, about designing inclusive events. And I think that has some really helpful resources in it for not only gender related issues, but just generally how to create more inclusive physical spaces.
That would be helpful. I wonder if, Eric, there's a things like a repository of these things, right? The 7 that Liva shared, and the inclusive spaces and convenings that Antonia and the wonderful people at Change Catalyst do. But I feel like if we're going to, I don't want to get away from the speaker bureau discussion because that's relevant, but I think that as ecosystem builders, it's imperative for us to model that. I know that for us, I used to be an advisor at a leadership camp for youth, and we would go and rename the bathrooms, right? They became non-gender bathrooms. So it was occupied or not occupied, and it slowed things down because it was one stall at a time. Like you could have a bathroom with 5 toilets, but because we wanted to create a safe space for everybody and an inclusive space, you had a thing that either the bathroom was occupied or the bathroom was not occupied, and it didn't matter who you were and which one you used. So but we see a lot of that. The funny thing is I see it more sometimes in a place like Tulsa, Oklahoma, than I see in New York City. And that's, I feel like we're moving ahead little by little, but there are some companies that I know. There's an oil and gas company that has gender neutral bathrooms in Tulsa, which I'm very proud of. The fact that they're being mindful about it, but maybe that's a curated resource that we can help put together when we talk about an inclusive field, because if we don't think about how people gather, how do we gather people as ecosystem builders? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that totally resonates with me as well, Celia, particularly like how it can sometimes slow things down. When you're designing an inclusive event, how people gather, of course, is really important, or just designing an inclusive space. And so, for example, when you're looking at venues, trying to see everything through the eyes of a person who may be underrepresented in a particular way is difficult, and sometimes it slows that process down. I think specifically with regards to the bathroom inclusivity, something that we've learned over the years is ideally, you'll have stalls that go from floor to ceiling to give people as much privacy as possible. But if you are, for example, like changing the signage on existing gendered bathrooms, there are certain steps that you need to take, like actually blocking off the urinals, like if they are in there, because it's something that people do every day. They go into a certain autopilot, I think, and might just see them there, walk in and go about their business, for lack of a better term. So, doing that, like to actually kind of switch people's mindset. But something that is interesting that we've tried to include recently is actually the presence of both gendered and non-gendered spaces. And the reason for that is because for some people with certain religious affiliations, or for whatever reason, say for example, a woman wearing hijab who wants to wash herself before she prays, she needs to be able to remove her headscarf, wash herself, and then proceed to pray in a space that we've provided for her. So we, of course, want to be inclusive to those people who would like to have spaces that are not gendered, but it's important, I think, to recognize the spectrum that exists in people's needs and account for everybody.
That's really powerful. Thank you. Eric, what are you thinking? You're busy writing, so that's helpful.
I'm busy writing. Oh yeah, and I forgot that I was not muted. I'm thinking that this is kind of exactly what we wanted to get into. There's sort of in a way, like the Trojan horse of this is to get to exactly what you were talking about a little bit earlier, is kind of getting together that larger basket of resources and places to look at, and that might help inform us or might help lead us down the path to some of the more specific projects like this speaker bureau or speaker information. So I'm sort of doing yes and. Jose, did you have something?
No, I'm good. I'm good.
I kind of had a follow-up question to what Celia said, as well as the other part where, it's not just about the high-level information and the questions, but it's actually engaging on ground level. And so in my community especially, I feel like we are not even there to have conversations about gender fluidity. We are still struggling to kind of even get the basics about having more participation whenever it's like female or whatever that is. So how do any of you have experience with kind of building that up from the ground level, like where you're trying to expose people to a higher level conversation, but taking care of the basic issues first?
I think I find that you start with commonality, right? You start with common purpose and convene people. And then when you build the trust and collaboration, then you engage. Because without trust and collaboration, it's very hard. It's very in your face. And you can't build trust and collaboration by talking about building trust and collaboration, which is what we try to do all the time, right? We talk about how do we get to mass collaboration? Well, we found that that's the I don't know if people have seen the graphic that our ESHIP team uses around the way that we approach the work, and it's basically creating a foundation of relationships, building a sense of community where people feel like they belong. And then on top of that, when you're doing that, then you get more communication and visibility. And then that builds to coordination and alignment, which then builds to the collaboration. But we also found that on our team, we can only infuse up to the coordination part. The collaboration has to come from the rest of the community. And I'll find the graphic while you're talking. I'm curious to hear from Jose when, because I understand that your organization is supportive, focused on specific ethnicity and demographic, right?
Correct.
So sometimes we forget that it's important to focus almost exclusively in order to be able to support inclusion
Correct.
into a wider area. So I'd like for you to share about that.
So the way we work in the way we approach this is, the focus is to open opportunities for Latino entrepreneurs, whether it's through access of some sort of a service or program, or to create the right conditions for them to be able to start businesses or grow their existing businesses. So that's the main focus of what we do. However, in terms of inclusion and gender equality and all that, our approach is to also be a part of the change and work that through our board and our leadership. And so I was actually looking at, I'm getting ready because tomorrow we have a board meeting, my statewide board meeting here in North Carolina, and the majority of the board members are female. And so that shows that, and our end users, I was also looking at the end users that we impact and we help. It's about 30% women entrepreneurs. So it's a sizable number of people that we affect and we assist. So we thought, well, if we are having an impact on this specific end audience, they should also be represented on leadership, on the board. So we worked towards that, and so we achieved, we're happy to report that, the that is reflected in our board, in our leadership, and we want to continue that. So that's the way we want to make sure, yeah, we equality for, Latino entrepreneurs, opportunities, gender opportunities, all that. We also are applying that internally. So that's something that we're very proud of. And the other thing is that it doesn't necessarily have to be leadership, doesn't have to be necessarily be made up of Latinos only. In fact, the majority, not the majority, but we have quite a few non-Latino members of the board. So that's very important for us as well. I hope I answered your question, Cecilia.
Yes.
Okay.
Here, I'll share my screen on the thing that I was talking about, the relationships community, that kind of thing. I know some of you have seen this. It's really about, we thought about it as like a Maslow triangle at one point, and then Faye Horwitz of Forward Cities comes walking along, and she's like, that's upside down, because you don't reach a pinnacle of collaboration. You actually reach, a wider thing. And she said Maslow was wrong too. So that's a very interesting discussion. But you hear a lot of people say that you're not being transparent or you're not sharing information, and we find that it's usually because of a lack of relationships, because we don't know what we don't know. We just want more information, and then because we don't know each other, I don't know what you need to know, and sometimes you don't know what you need to know. Right? So the more relationship building that we have, the sense of trust, then it gets smoother to be able to share. So the communication and visibility increases. It's not I'm hiding something, but I just don't know what to share with you. And then with communication and visibility, that challenge of silos starts to come apart. It's not that silos are still very important, because that's where you laser focus to get the work done. The problem isn't the silo, it's the communication between the silos. So you're coordinating and aligning because now you have more information. So we don't duplicate effort so much, or we work in tandem with each other, because I can see what you're working on, you can see what I'm working on, and we can create alignment, kind of like traffic rules. So you don't have to follow the traffic rules, but when you don't follow the traffic rules, chances are you will collide, right? Or go off the road somewhere. But if you're able to, and I'm not talking about cooperation, that's one C word that's not included in this. You hear people say, oh, you're not cooperating. Well, cooperation seems to be going along to get along. It's the way we always do it. And that's not necessarily what we're aiming for, right? We're aiming for something where we can pivot because we see that that market's taken care of, or that problem is being resolved. And then at the very end, there's collaboration. But also, as far as the ESHIP team goes, we've realized that we can only actually help up until the coordination and alignment part. And we keep working. And I think the ESHIP champions are the same way. The collaboration has to come from the community. You cannot force collaboration. You can't make people collaborate, right? You can make people cooperate, but you can't necessarily make people collaborate. So our job is continually in this cycle to help with the relationships, to help with the visibility and communication, to coordinate and align so we're guardrail holders and hold that squishy, flexible scaffolding that we talk about. So there, that's my share on how we continue to work on being inclusive as far as this goes. And I'll share the link. Tia, what you got?
No, I think that is really helpful. Just the relationship building, and sometimes I even wondered that even though it's a both way street, maybe we just need to be more intentional and then lending that firsthand and bringing the information. So
I'll share, like, going back to one of your earlier questions, there's some preliminary conversation that's needed, but I think what was really useful in Albuquerque is that in partnership with a local organization that's helping build the ecosystem, we did a lot of implicit bias, training around implicit bias, and just that kind of background to get that general understanding that there's a lot of different biases, whether that's around race and ethnicity or gender, et cetera, et cetera. So that was a very, I think, productive conversation because, you know, even for maybe even especially for those that didn't necessarily think they had some bias, that was a real eye opener. So that led to real productive conversations. And the fact that we'd all kind of been through that together, or many of us from economic development and some of the other departments that we've been through that together, I think that also helped, you know, build us up as a team that was focusing about these issues.
I have a question regarding unconscious bias training and bias training as such. I have an experience here in Denmark where, as such, bias training can increase your awareness, right? But the organization, the intention with hiring someone to do the bias training, the intention was to fix the men in the room. So, which actually just made the whole situation go south. So I know the trainer is competent, and I've seen her work in so many other contexts where it's worked really well. But in this case, where the intention of the organization that hired her was to fix the men in the room, what are your thoughts on that?
That sounds like it's setting things up for failure, or at least more kind of difficulty. Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, that.
So that's diversity, not inclusion, right? Or it's equity and not necessarily inclusion. I think the inclusion part is the practice. It's the action verb. It's the thing that we shoot for. I do unconscious bias training around cultural values. So it's not the how racist are you kind of thing, but it's a measurement or a scale of what we call cultural values, are things that you recognize about people and their habits. So it's your proximity or your relationship to ambiguity or time or authority, and how you work in that. So so a lot of my focus is team dynamics, recognizing that in somebody else. So there's, are you more of a person who's a doer or more of a being person? Are you more collectivist minded? So are you all of us, we kind of person, or are you an individualist? You know, in the United States, culturally, is more individualist. Countries like China, more collectivist, right? So it was a really interesting process to see a couple of people in our workshop were with the Air Force. And all three members of the team of Air Force Special Ops were doers. And they had this perception that if you weren't doing, you were lazy. And so they dismissed the people who are being as, oh, those people over there that just let things happen. And then all the consultants in the room like shot up their hand and said, wait a minute, what you're seeing is you as all doers at the very far end of the scale, you're constantly going, which is helpful, but then you don't know what's going on in the wake of what's happening. So you don't know what your actions are doing because you just keep constantly doing. So how do you affect change or know that what you're doing isn't working? Because you don't know what's going on behind you. So, so after all of this discussion, they realized that they needed somebody on their team who actually is somebody who keeps note of that, right? People are introverts are usually wonderful scribes, and they note the things that are not being said in the room. People that are extroverts usually focus on the things that are happening, the people, the engagement. So only what's in your face, but not necessarily the sense of what's happening in the room. And introverts are great at being able to recognize that. So trying to bring those dynamics in. But I think it, to your point, it depends on what your intention is. If your intention is to make other people in the room feel less than or experience what other people
in this case the intention was to fix the blind men so they could finally see. But I mean, that was, if we are all biased, then what was that intention was, you know, the training was great, right? She's really competent, but if the intention by sending her into the team and only fixing the men to make them see, right? That's I think in this whole conversation, if the intention, again, back to the 7 principle, don't try to fix men nor women, or just don't try to fix people, it could state, right? But how would you address this when organizations, they raise their voice and their intention to be a fixer intention? How do you, have you met this before, that the intention is off?
I think that there's a lot of that, and it doesn't necessarily come from evil, right? It's not necessarily bad. There's a desire to do something to equate, but then that's the perception that there's a good and a bad, there's a right and a wrong. You know, there's a lot of nuances. I think what Sheena posted about her regional scorecard, about measuring where you are, those metrics are really important, because if you don't know where you are, then you don't know where you need to go or address those things. So Sheena, thanks for sharing your scorecard. But I think that's why the Goal 5 team is important too, right? So how that metrics measures into the things that we're trying to obtain and what your end goal is. So.
Yeah, and I'll just say, I think to the extent that I've seen anything like that, it was really sort of headed off in the planning, where, you know, whoever you're consulting with or whoever's, you know, working on delivering the training, at least I think the office I was working with, we knew to a fair extent that there was a problem with how different ethnicities were treated in town. And that was kind of our focus. Not exactly to fix that, but to raise awareness. And I think if I recall, the folks that we were working on with this, they took it a step back and say, well, you know, if we just kind of introduce this concept and we'll have the people in the room see where, you know, not be hit over the head, but arrive at that conclusion themselves, they can see that there's biases around a lot of different, you know, old, young, all sorts of different dimensions. So I don't know. I think it's all. I think it behooves, or it's almost a responsibility of the people who are helping plan this to kind of think that through, and or the consultant to share some of that perspective.
So last couple of minutes, if there's something that you'd like to cover, or do you have any questions about Anything coming up? I just got off of the summit design call. So.
Oh, give us the inside scoop. So I'll mention in the documents I've included, and there may be some updates that are needed. I've included the link to get to the general information around the summit, a Forward Cities event that's coming up, the 2 links for the Change Catalyst Tech Inclusion events that are coming up. But yeah, if you can share any insights on this call, I think we'd love to hear that.
So the invitation for the Mayor's Conference on Entrepreneurship has gone out to the mayors that have attended before. If you know that your mayor or your mayor's staff has attended the ESHIP Summit before, I would encourage them to make sure that they get pre-registered because it will open up to other mayors. Mayors are invited along to come and learn and be involved in ecosystem building. This year, the ESHIP Summit, end of June, beginning of July, will be open and really focusing and inviting you to bring along people in your community. Ecosystem building isn't easy. It's definitely a team sport. So think about the people on your team. Think about the people you want on your team. Think about the people who don't play well with others, but you definitely need to have. So all those things matter. If I would love to, I know we're always inviting people from outside of the United States to be involved. I'm wondering if there's an international delegation of some sort that could work together because you understand the nuanced differences in your respective communities. But we've also got people in the Nordic countries that are coming, like Valto. So it would be great to be able to kind of work together as people that are doing things in your community in your own custom and bespoke ways. So that's the goal. That ESHIP registration should be going out sometime at the end of March, where the registration site will open up. We're working along what does it look like to come together as a community, a group, organizations like Antonia's that are national resource providers. They're the people that work across the field, across the country, wider regions. They will be an integral part of these discussions as well. And of course, they come and help move our field along as well. So that's what I've got. So it's end of June to beginning of July. It's the Mayor's Conference on Entrepreneurship starts on the 28th of June. The ESHIP Summit starts officially on the 29th. I would leave a couple of days in there in case you'd like to come to Kansas City and hang out with other ecosystem builders. We are, of course, because we're keeping an eye on all that's going on with the coronavirus and the concerns that are being raised. We will continue to keep an eye on that. I know that our Startup Champions Network, which is a professional association of ecosystem builders, has a summit coming up next week, and we'll be seeing what that looks like in South by Southwest, and all of these things are happening. So yeah, it's up there. Let's see, ecosystem builders in New York City. There are some. I'm going to think about people off the top of my head. I know that I just had a call with Ron Stubblefield. He's in Baltimore, but he came out of NYU and was, if you're not familiar with the book Covering by Kenji Yoshino, who's a law professor at NYU, I would highly recommend. It's the notion that everybody is covering some aspect of their persona because they feel the need to assimilate into the social culture, and so Kenji Yoshino makes a really interesting set of I don't want to say arguments, but points about covering. Deloitte and Touche. So Deloitte, the consulting firm, follows a lot of Kenji Yoshino's work. And while a lot of the world's corporations are embracing employee resource groups, ERGs or BRGs, Deloitte a couple of years ago disbanded their employee resource groups in favor of inclusion councils. They realized that the power dynamic sits with cis-white hetero males in their organization, and almost never are cis-white hetero males included in those conversations. So it's hard to shift a power dynamic when the people with the power don't know what you're talking about because they're not included. There's a need for affinity groups, so people that look, sound, act, are interested in things like that you are. So there's still an interest in that, but yeah, it's still, you know, kind of those things. Dia, you had a question.
Well, I just wanted to throw it out to the group that if there was any ideas for topics or discussions for the next meeting, please feel free to kind of let us know, or something that we would like to specifically focus on.
Any questions? Any concerns? Eric, are you good?
I'm loving that last question. So I think most of you have the link. You'll get that sort of in follow-up emails and all that other kind of stuff. But if you're in the agenda, feel free to answer that question. We just put that in there as well. But yeah, thanks very much to everyone for participating today. So I'm thankful.
Well, thank you, guys.
Thank you. Oh, yeah, where do I find all the links? Are you signed up for the ESHIP newsletter? Okay. All of the information on the ESHIP Summit and the Mayor's Conference will come out in that. Antonia, do you have a parting word for us?
Thank you very much to everyone who's on the call. It was great to hear some new voices, and looking forward to seeing what everyone's working on going forward.
Right, and Sheena. Oh, good. All right. We'll look forward to your audio and video working as well. And we'll look forward to seeing everybody next month.
Awesome.
Thank you, everyone.
Sounds good.
Thank
Thanks
you.
again, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.